YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and for this video I'm going to be counting down the top 10 best Stephen King movies. Specifically his horror movies, because that's what we do on this channel. Although interestingly, I have to say 3 of his non-horror films would have scored very highly on this list. I'm talking about Stand By Me, The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, although that one does have some supernatural elements. So interestingly, 3 of his non-horror adaptations are 3 of the best Stephen King movies you'll see. But like I say, this is a horror channel, so we're going to go through the top 10 best Stephen King horror movies. And as with most of my videos, this is going to be not necessarily the best movies, but the ones that I like and get the most enjoyment from. So another tough list to compile. I had to leave off some pretty good movies, but let's get on with it with the top 10 best Stephen King movies. In at number 10 we have Sleepwalkers from 1992. A rather understated and underrated Stephen King movie in my opinion, but this one's really good. This one sees this mother and son who are like vampire creatures, and they've been run out of one town and they make their way to this quiet, sleepy suburban town to start up again. But they need like the lifeblood of young women in order to sustain themselves. So the young man, he starts dating this high school girl, but only with the intention of getting her blood to keep them going. And she learns of this and has to kind of fight out of that situation. But this one, it kind of comes across as being one of the lesser Stephen King movie adaptations. In a way it kind of is, but it's definitely worth your time. It's a real fun, enjoyable movie. It's rife with these cozy early 90s sensibilities. I really like the early 90s feel of this one. It's got some really good creature effects in it. The vampires in this are kind of like cat-like creatures and look really good. And also, to say this is a pretty low-key movie, it's got some really impressive cameos in this. Stephen King himself makes an appearance in this, plus Clive Barker, John Landis, Toby Hooper, Mark Hamill. It's got a really impressive, and I have to say unexpected, bunch of cameos that pop up in this film. To say what a kind of off-the-radar film it is, there are some big names that make themselves known throughout the film. It's worth watching for that. Quite fun to spot all the various famous people that pop up in the background. So yeah, Sleepwalkers, I've always thought it's a really good film, but like I say, it's just not one that gets the hype that a lot of Stephen King movies do. But it's definitely worth checking out. So in at number 10 we have Sleepwalkers. In at number 9 we have The Shining from 1980. I felt that I couldn't put this one any higher than that. In terms of generally great movies, this certainly would have been higher on a countdown. But it's well documented now that this is a very, very loose adaptation of Stephen King's book. Stanley Kubrick took a lot of liberties with this one. And it's no secret now that Stephen King really hates this movie. He's been very vocal about his dislike for it and the fact that he did not get on with Stanley Kubrick at all. So in terms of Stephen King adaptations, this is really not kind of one to fix on and look at too much. But as a general horror movie, I do love this film, and I have to say I love what Stanley Kubrick did with it. It's great to see such a kind of pioneering, visionary director bring his hand to the horror genre, and it just works so well. It's one of the first films that like really actually scared me. The atmosphere in this one is really strong. There's a lot of theories about what the movie is really about, and certain nods to this and cryptic messages that suggest that, which you can kind of dissect all day. That's probably something for a different video. But just as a sort of straight up intelligent, effective horror film, The Shining is excellent. You know, not even mentioning yet the iconic performances from Jack Nicholson, who seems genuinely unhinged throughout this one. Shelley Duvall, who seems genuinely terrified throughout this one. Again, she had a hard time with Stanley Kubrick. And The Shining as well has one of my favourite openings to a horror film as well. That beautiful panning shot over the mountains up to the Overlook Hotel with the super ominous soundtrack playing over it. It's a real kind of bone-chilling start to a horror film. So yeah, very, very effective and iconic in many ways. But as I say, not one to kind of directly link all that well to a Stephen King adaptation. So in at number 9, we have The Shining. In at number 8, we have The Dark Half from 1993. Another underrated Stephen King adaptation, in my opinion. This one is a really good and really interesting horror film. This one follows this successful author whose pseudonym alter ego may or may not be taking over his personal life. And it all goes down a dark path, gets quite violent and leads to a few kills. But you need to sort of watch this one and see how it unfolds. But as well as being a really good horror film, particular praise to this one, I must say, goes to Timothy Hutton, who plays the troubled novelist. And I have to admit, I've not seen Timothy Hutton in a lot of things, and he doesn't come across as the most powerhouse of performers, but his performance in this kind of duality-themed role is really effective. He's so good in this, and I give him full credit for how he comes across. From going from this sort of laid-back family man to this kind of unhinged, roguish killer is fantastic. The way he plays it off and they seem like two genuine different characters is really, really good. Definitely worth watching for that kind of troubled performance from him. But this is one where I'm not quite sure why this movie isn't well known. Like I said, it's a really good movie. It's a George Romero film. You've got Michael Rooker in this as the sheriff, and I think it just plays out really well. So in at number 8, we have The Dark Half. In at number 7, we have The Night Flyer from 1997. Another really underrated Stephen King movie. This one sees this kind of shady reporter, played by Miguel Ferrer, played really well in this by Miguel Ferrer. And he's on the trail of this vampire creature who's travelling from airport to airport and sort of killing people along the way. And it sort of plays out like a dark Private Eye movie almost, with sort of Miguel Ferrer trying to track this creature down. But The Night Flyer is one that's dripping with very kind of dark and moody atmosphere. This one has a real kind of ominous feel to it, where you sense that it's leading to some kind of confrontation between Miguel Ferrer's character and the creature, but you just don't quite know how it's going to play out. And it's kind of set to these real kind of dark and rainy scenes, a lot of which are set on these kind of like expansive runways and airports in kind of like the middle of nowhere. So yeah, really good dark atmosphere to this one. And the vampire creature, you do see him towards the end. He gets a good unveiling and he looks really cool. There's some good practical effects on display here. And it just has an interesting dynamic because Miguel Ferrer's character in this is not exactly a likeable guy. So you're not sort of really sure who to root for or what to feel when this is happening and you know, how it's going to come across between him and the creature. So yeah, really interesting stuff. And like I say, another very underrated Stephen King movie that should get more recognition. So in at number 7, we have The Night Flyer. In at number 6, we have Pet Sematary from 1989. The book that Stephen King said was the scariest one that he wrote, and it definitely makes for a scary movie. This one sees this family move into this beautiful house, albeit it's set next to this busy road, which sees these freight trucks roaring down there at all times of day and night. And early on in the film, unfortunately, the family cat falls victim to this and gets squished by one of the trucks. But the family is informed by their kindly elderly neighbour, played by Herman Munster himself, Fred Gwynn, that there is a pet cemetery in the woods, and if you bury something there, it will come back to life. And as crazy as this sounds, the father does that and the cat comes back, but he's not quite himself. And then later on in the movie, tragically, spoiler alert, but it is from 1989, the young kid is then hit and killed by a truck, and the father, in his grief, buries the kid in the pet cemetery. The kid comes back, but again, the kid is not himself, and it all gets very dark and terrifying from there. But Pet Sematary is a heavy one. It deals with some heavy themes, principally the loss and grief of losing a child. And as effective as that is, that element was somewhat lost on me because I don't have kids. I'm not parental in any kind of way. But what Pet Sematary did do when I first saw it, and it terrified me, was the portrayal of Zelda, the sister that's locked away in the attic bedroom. She has some kind of affliction, and it's just sort of kind of put in the movie as a backstory. But I was not ready for that scene. That really took me back, and it terrified me as a kid, and has always stayed with me. The image of Zelda, so it does that really well. And yeah, Pet Sematary I just think is a really good film. It is scary. It's hard to watch in some places. But other places it's fun and entertaining. I like the guy with half his head missing. As I say, you've got Fred Gwynne in this, who gives a great performance. And look out for another cameo in this from Stephen King himself as the vicar. So yeah, in at number 6 we have Pet Sematary. In at number 5 we have The Mist from 2007. A movie that, although it kind of plays out as like a serious film with sort of modernized societal tendencies, also harks back to kind of like the 1950s giant bug movies. It's an interesting mix. But this one sees these townspeople, they are stranded inside this sort of big grocery store, which has had this mysterious mist descend down upon it. And they can't leave because within the mist is these mutated bugs and tentacled monstrosities which kill off anyone who tries to venture out into the mist. And it's a really effective movie, very tense, very kind of character driven, and it's one that sort of toys with the idea of people being the real monsters rather than the creatures that are outside. This is mainly explored through the overly zealous religious woman whose kind of biblical ramblings start to turn the heads of the panicked shoppers inside, and they sort of turn to her for guidance in the desperation, and it leads to kind of quite distressing scenes actually, where they turn on the protagonists and in the most kind of heightened scene demand like the sacrifice of a child in order to save themselves. It all gets very, very crazy. And this one really delivers on the creatures as well. It's kind of a surprising film because it plays it very straight, but it really has some awesome kind of giant monster bug creatures, tentacled things coming in, weird flying monsters, all these slimy looking creatures. It really brings that aspect as well. So it's a very effective movie on kind of 2 counts. Thomas Jane's great in the lead role, and everyone does their job really well in this, as the various characters that are in this. It's a smorgasbord of interesting and diverse characters that all come together in this rather terrifying, isolated situation. And it's actually one where Stephen King said he appreciates, or he prefers the movie ending to the ending of his book, which was high praise indeed. So in at number 5 we have The Mist from 2007. In at number 4 we have Misery from 1990. Certainly one of the sleekest Stephen King adaptations. This one sees a writer played by James Caan. He has a nasty car accident, but fortunately, it would seem, he is taken in and nursed back to health from this lady, Annie Wilkes, played brilliantly by Kathy Bates, who helps nurse him back to health and encourages him to write another one of these books that he writes that she so adores. But when it turns out that she is not approving of his next book and how it ends, it quite simply leads to one of the most terrifying character performances you will ever see in a film from Kathy Bates. I mean, she practically carries this film, and it's a masterclass of acting and going from kind of real kind of kindly, sweet, unassuming lady to just crazy, terrifying, unpredictable person, and it makes for a very uncomfortable watch. And I've said before, the hobbling scene in this, I still can't watch that without completely squirming in my seat. It's one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. Expertly directed by Rob Reiner. Very kind of sort of small, intimate movie, to be honest. There's very few people in it. Lauren Bacall pops up in it, as does Richard Farnsworth. He has a small role in this, but it's very much the dynamic, the terrifying dynamic, and strangely kind of love-hate dynamic between James Caan and Kathy Bates' character in this, which is fascinating to watch, but just has a completely terrifying undertone. And as I say, just a really well put together Stephen King adaptation. So in at number 4, we have Misery. Into the top 3 now, and these were really hard to put in any kind of order because I love all 3 of these films. But in at number 3, we have Salem's Lot from 1979. One of the most popular movies on this channel. I get so many comments about Salem's Lot and how people remember seeing it on TV for the first time and it terrified them and it's always stayed with them. And it is a really great film, very effective movie. I don't think it's particularly aged well, but I actually think that kind of adds to it. The kind of old dusty look of Salem's Lot has a real charm, which sort of this new adaptation, if it ever comes out, I think will suffer from that, from being kind of like too glossy. But it's a great movie. I love David Soul in this. He's a great character. I love the sort of the town of Salem's Lot and how that's sort of represented, and the sort of the few townsfolk that are in it. Now it all kind of gets like whittled down within this like vampire curse. The vampire itself in this, played by Reginalda, is one of the best looking that you'll see. They sort of went for like a Nosferatu look in this, and it's creepy as hell and really well done. And there's other kind of scary scenes in this, like the kid at the window and things like that, which everybody seems to remember. But yeah, Salem's Lot, maybe the best TV movie ever made. A real kind of heavyweight of the Stephen King adaptations. I kind of always considered it to be a rather underrated film, but like I say, since doing my channel, you are never too far away from a Salem's Lot comment on my videos, so it does seem to resonate with so many people out there, which is great to see, because it is just simply an excellent Stephen King adaptation. So in at number 3, we have Salem's Lot. In at number 2, we have Carrie from 1976. Brian De Palma's masterclass presentation of Stephen King's first novel. Iconic now, where we see sort of Sissy Spacek as the outcast, bullied girl with dark telekinetic powers, which are kind of unveiled in a horrifying way after she is humiliated at the high school prom. And Carrie, I mentioned this before, but it's a very unique horror film, I find, in that it elicits a lot of emotion and sympathy in ways that most horror movies don't. Like, you know, most horror movies, they're full of characters that are just fodder, you know, for creative deaths and things like that. This one plays out very differently to this one. And, you know, yes, you want to see the bullies get their comeuppance, but it's all centered around the tragic story of this kind of misunderstood, bullied girl who can't even turn to her own mother because she's kind of like a religious fanatic as well, and played terrifyingly well by Piper Laurie. She is genuinely scary in this movie. And I also love the style that De Palma brings to this. It has kind of his trademark split screen cinematography. The bit over the prom is so well done and plays out in such a gripping yet scary way. Great performances all around. I love Sissy Spacek's performance in this. She's got a real sense of vulnerability and naivety, which is just perfect for that presentation of her character. And yeah, as I said, the prom scene in this as well still kind of gives me goosebumps the way it plays out. It's really good. And as far as Stephen King adaptations go, it's pretty close to the source novel as well, from what I remember from reading the book years ago. It's definitely similar to that. So yeah, in at number 2, we have Carrie. And in at number 1, my favourite Stephen King adaptation is Christine from 1983. John Carpenter directing a Stephen King story doesn't get much cooler than that. And I really like the story of Christine. I love the idea of this possessed car and it sort of taking over this nerdy kid, played really well by Keith Gordon. I love his character arc through the film, how he goes from kind of like nerdy, clumsy outcast to this like rebel without a cause, bad guy, all sort of fueled by this weird possessive car. And Christine herself looks great. I love the shiny red car look. And also I saw a bit of Christine not too long ago, and I actually forgot how much of like a badass film this is. Like, it is shot beautifully and expertly well. The scenes of kind of Christine's headlights coming on in the darkness and that synth music kicking in was really quite exhilarating. And the shots of like Christine on fire driving down the road, it's a wonderfully shot film. It looks fantastic and it's put together really well with kind of like those 80s John Carpenter techniques. It's just absolutely fantastic, and one that I really enjoy. It's a real kind of popcorn movie as well, so it's not too heavy, like perhaps sort of Carrie or Pet Sematary, things like that. It's one that you can really have fun with, and it's just, yeah, a really cool movie. So my number one Stephen King adaptation is Christine. So there we go, guys. That is my top 10 favourite Stephen King movies. Let me know what you think about that. I know I've got a lot of Stephen King fans on this channel, so let me know if you agree with that list. If not, what would your top 10 favourite Stephen King adaptations be? I'd love to hear. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.